Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome also from my side. I will immediately try to share my screen. I hope everybody can see it now. I am actually coming back here to one point which was also raised by a participant. Thanks for that. And that was a question about what ESPON is actually developing in terms of also contributing to policy making, which is referring to the set of tools and instruments which can be used in planning circumstances. And that already links our project here to the also to the input to the Austrian spatial planning process. OIR, as you have pointed out, is certainly a veteran within ESPON, and we were actually involved in several, so to say, tool developments. One of them is the more successful brother of the one I'm going to present here, which is the Territorial Impact Assessment Quick Check, which hopefully also might be useful for the now mentioned or the early on mentioned Territorial Agenda priority individual actions to be used there. What we did here, and that and Paul, you were pointing that out, we were doing actually a targeted analysis here. And the starting point was a year ago or something like that. So there was no COVID in sight. Tourism as a sectoral policy was deemed still as being confronted mostly with over-tourism, rather than the shocking experience we are facing now as a sector which is actually suffering enormously and will be probably suffering for quite some time now. And we had to live with these drastic changes, so to say, in the character of the project, which means that originally, as the name here says, we were supposed to develop a methodology for capturing carrying capacity, meaning something like a limit to a regional setting in terms of how much tourism can a region bear actually, or a destination. And switching actually now here to a more actually regional development tool, which will fathom in a way the capacity of destinations and or regions to develop themselves. The point is that, of course, tourism is and this fits nicely also in the discussion we had with David and the others about, okay, where is planning actually involved? I mean, tourism is a purely sectoral policy in itself. So spatial planning and also the Austrian development, spatial development strategy in this respect is something like operating from the sidelines of the action, because it is mainly the actors in the regions who are defining what tourism is. We have seen that very badly in a way in the circumstances of Austria, of Ischgl as the hotspot of spreading the virus all over Europe, and having a type of tourism in place, which certainly was not in our understanding. However, we have to live with the fact, all of us actually, that we are all tourists. And as a matter of fact, there are little parts in us who are actually seeking this kind of action in our tourist adventures. So this means, and this brings me back to the fact we were facing here, is that, of course, when we define something like a pathway towards tourism development now out of the crisis, we will have to be aware of the fact that the main addressees and the main action of correspondence, and that's already the first message also for the ÖREC, is the regional one or the local one, because there actually the decisions are taken, there the way of moving forward is defined, so to say. And that's also reflected in the tool development we are showing you here. So the addressees of these tools are certainly not the ÖREC or the ÖROC in our case here in Austria, or spatial planning authorities on a national level, but these are the destinations, the destination managers, the regional managers, and the mayors in principle, and that's how it is designed, and that's what I'm going to present very briefly here. So the concept is actually an idea of a systemic one, that we say, okay, tourism in a way can be regarded on a systemic point of view as an exposure which is coming into a territorial setting. In our case, the starting point was actually as a territorial setting, because tourist managers very often define destinations very broadly or very in a very narrow way, and connected very often to locations which are in a way municipalities, locations, very small ones. But we found out in the discussion that, of course, we have to set a broader territorial setting very often. So we are ending up now with a granulation of about LAO regions or NUTS 3 regions in a way. And to those, of course, we have a territorial context attached to it, and in there flows our exposure, and together then we can depict these interrelations with indicators, and from that we derive then at a system of showing what carrying capacity or what development paths might be shown. We have a very strongly moderated tool developed here, working in 5 steps in principle. I won't go into detail, and very strongly corresponding always with feedback loops with the destinations or with the regions themselves, in order, one, to gather information, but then also to discuss then the possible ways forward in a very interactive way. So the first steps were mainly to identify exactly this systemic context, or they are there to identify the systemic context in the form of a territorial impact, so to say, system perspective, where you draw pictures about, okay, how is tourism as an exposure interacting. You also see here on this slide that we were already at that time, and these were really workshops conducted in the territories. As I said, this is a targeted analysis project, and the stakeholders were 4 tourism destinations in Slovenia, and one with one being a cross-border tourist destination, which is Nova Gorica. And they, of course, were participating physically in these workshops. Thank God, was briefly before the lockdown. And then this information, which is gathered in the destinations, is then fed into a web-based platform, the so-called dashboard, where we compute then information gathered there. On the one hand, we are computing classical statistical information, using that for prescribing the trends, or for a trend analysis, for instance, but also already to pair up according to the needs of the destinations, socioeconomic contexts with, for instance, tourism contexts. On the other hand, we were using big data or social media information. In our case, this was Instagram data, for detecting and mirroring what are, on the one hand, perceptions of tourist destinations, and what are, the other hand, the real, so to say, facts about tourist flows in itself. So what you can see here is our heat maps, for instance, from Instagram postings in Gorica, Nova Gorica, where you can see and fathom out where are then touristic hotspots, and where are then, of course, a risk of managing or a need for managing these flows, for instance. But what we also did with the Instagram data is then we looked into sentiment analysis. So we looked for each of the destinations or regions then into something like where you can compare the sentiments the people posting there were having. In our case, this would be anger or trust or surprise or whatever, and found out that at least in the destination we were analyzing, of course, they were pretty similar in a way, which is for the Slovenian destinations a good message in a way. Then what is furthermore in the tool, of course, is that you have mapping devices. It wouldn't be an ESPON project if this wouldn't be the case. So you have mapping devices where you can establish something like comparisons across territories. In our case, we just filtered out here Slovenia as the case we were looking at. And you can here see from the changes over time, like here tourism intensity 2008 or 19, what the changes are in the intensity and how you compare then to similar destinations in your territories, which also is giving you then a good information. And finally, what is then the outcome is then in the last final step, which again is conducted in an interactive way. You feed back this information gathered and created and look into something like that. You try to narrow yourself down to a pathway into a more sustainable destination management and tourism development in this case, which is strongly linked, of course, to regional development itself. And what was very often surprising also for the actors, which were in the first place primarily tourism actors, so people from hotels, the tourism managers, but also then, of course, the people from the regions, other stakeholders in the regions. And soon they realized that actually tourism development means regional development very often. And therefore, this territorial link in terms of spatial development issue can only be detected then. This is something what also I think Thomas was a little bit referring to, that if we create planning visions in the large scale like the ÖREG, we never need to forget that the final decisions and actually the structuring is done on this local and very regional scale. And I think with this tool we can create that, and it's a tool which is generally available and will be hopefully then accessible through ESPON and can be used all over Europe. Thanks.